What's up, Financials and Masters? Okay, today we're going to continue on the path of how to generate passive income from your savings on a sustainable basis. Today I'm going to cover how you replace the money that you're spending every year, how you refill your living expense bucket. But first, welcome to the Financial Zen channel. The big question is, how can you, a super successful, hardworking overachiever with kids at home and a mortgage to pay, how can you quit your 9-to-5 grind to go pursue your passion while still providing for your family? That's the question. I got your answers. I'm Rick Valenzi, a certified financial planner, the founder of Financial Zen, and your guide. Okay, let's recap it. So first, we discovered that the 4% rule, which is what the current thought on retirement distribution strategies is silliness, because it presents you with whole sorts of problems. Number two, we determined that the way to do a better way to do it is to create two different buckets, one for your living expenses for 10 years, the other one for long-term growth that you're going to use to replace your living expenses. Oh, I just gave myself away. More on that in a minute, though. And then we dove into how you actually invest the money in your living expense bucket, how you actually structure it so you have your annual income, your annual expenses paid for on an ongoing basis every single year. Okay, so how do you replace the 10 years worth of living expenses, right? Because you put 10 years of living expenses from day one, and to year one, now you got 9 years. If you don't do anything, and to year two, you got 8 years, right? It's going to be always shrinking, right? Your bucket's always going to be shrinking. And so the way that you replace it is with the long-term bucket over here, okay? Now, the reason why you separate the two is because we know when you invest in the markets, it's going to be good years and bad years, right? We know over time, the climate of the market, right, over time is only one direction, up, if you give it enough time. But the weather, the day-to-day weather, could be good, could be bad. We don't know. From year to year, we never know. And so you want to make sure that your living expenses aren't dependent on what the market's doing, right? So here's what you do to replace your living expenses that are dropping every year over here. You sell the gains in your long-term bucket. It's that simple. So if it was a good year and you have, so let's go back to numbers. Let's say you're spending $100,000 a year. That means your bond bucket, your safe bucket has $1 million in it, right? And then you have everything else invested in the markets, right? Growing year over year, presumably. So during the good years, you'll replace that 100 grand that you spent over in this bucket, right? So this one shrinks from 10 years to 9. If it was a good year in the markets and you made 100 grand in the markets that year, then you take that money, you sell it, and you replace it, put it in the other bucket, literally, whoop, and then you buy more bonds on the back end, right, of your ladder, right? It's called a bond ladder, is what I described to you yesterday. And it's just that simple. Now, in the bad years, when the stuff hits the fan and the markets are down and you didn't make money in your investment bucket over here, you just don't do anything, right? Because that means the market is temporarily down. The market is always only temporarily down if you take in the long view. And so we just write it out because we don't want to chip anything off. You need all the money to stay in there to grow because you need it all to grow when the market bounces back, and it always eventually bounces back. So that's the way you do it. So good years, you carve off enough to replace what you spent over here, if you have enough. Bad years, you don't do anything. You sit on it. Now, the magic of the way this all kind of comes together is, traditionally speaking, and again, this is a different topic for a different day, but traditionally speaking, the S&P 500 has, right, the market has earned an annual, has gone up 10% per year, right, over the long term, right, over the history of the stock market, 10% per year. So we kind of assume that over the long term, you should be earning like 10% in your investment bucket, right? So if you're spending, so now let's do the math, make it all come together. So if you're spending 100 grand per year, you got $1 million in your safe bucket. If you're earning 10% on your long-term bucket and you need to replace that 100 grand, then you need $1 million in your investment bucket, right? Because presumably you're making 100 grand over here in the investment bucket, you're spending 100 grand over here in your living expense bucket, so you carve off the gains here, drop them back in your investment bucket to get you back up to 10 years, and then you have 10 years to ride out the ups and downs in the market in case we got a nasty few years in your investment bucket. And it's that simple. That's not too complicated. I know that presents a whole slew of other options, like how do you invest in the long-term bucket, what kind of bonds do you buy, details, right, the fine print. But that's the strategy, folks. 10 years worth of living expenses in bonds and cash, everything else enough to cover, to replace the living expenses that you're spending in your investment portfolio, and you replace it during the good years. During the bad years, you just sit on your hands and you shrink your living expense bucket a little bit. that's it. That's the way I've been doing it for, I don't know. I came up with that, I think, my third year. So over a decade, I've been working, developing passive income from our Financial Zen members' portfolios in exactly this manner. And this is sustainable on an ongoing basis. Presumably, unless there are much worse in the world, much things going on in the world than what the markets are doing. In which case, we're probably not too worried about that stuff, anyways. All right, that's it. That's the topper. That's the finality. Hope you learned something. If you had an aha moment during this one, please make sure to comment on the below. Comment that below. I read all of them and I eat that stuff up. Make sure you subscribe if you're not subscribed for more stuff like this, and make sure you like the video. If you got something out of it. So, thanks for watching. That is the Financial Zen retirement distribution strategy and how you can generate passive income from your portfolio on a sustainable, ongoing basis. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.